Alright, so this is how to configure a DHCP for Lab 8. This is for anyone having trouble figuring it out. It's quite basic, I'd say. It's just different from what we've done, so it's quite difficult to some. So first off, after you've configured the entire network, and I'd suggest placing the IP addresses and subnet masks on the sections of where they're being used. These are all just stand-ins. I haven't done any subnetting because I couldn't really be bothered. So, we want to configure a DHCP server to give IPs to network 1, network 2, network 3, and network 4. Not to the DNS server because it's a server. They have to be static because, well, when you've got a server that doesn't have DHCP, that does have DHCP, it's all confusing. And the IP keeps changing. So the first thing you want to do with the DHCP server is configure its IP. Now if we have a look on the router that's connected to it, so IP interface brief, we can see that the IP address assigned to fast Ethernet 01 is 80.0.0.1. This is the default gateway for the server, and for the server only, nothing else. So IP address, due to the fact that 80.0.0.1 is taken, you'd use 80.0.0.2. Subnet mask, whatever you have set the subnet mask to. And default gateway, which is the 0.1. DNS server, as you can see down here, has been set to 50.0.0.254. That's configured. Now if I were to go to PC0, which has a static IP for testing only, and I go to the command prompt to ping 80.0.0.2, which is the DHCP server, I should get a response. Fingers crossed I do. Oh. Hey, there we go. Test it again. And reply from the IP. So this means the server is talking to the rest of the network. And we all know that. Now we go to services and the DHCP, turning it on to start with. For this, I wouldn't touch the server pool, because the server pool, whenever you change an IP in either config here or in the desktop IP, it changes the server pool, because it's the IP for the server. So for this kind of network, you want to create 4 new ones, one for each network. Network 1, network 2, network 3, and network 4. So if we name the first one, network 1, the default gateway. Now, this is not the default gateway for the DHCP server. This is the default gateway for that network. And if we have a look back at this router here, at fast Ethernet 00, we have set the default gateway to 60.0.0.1. And that's what we'll put here. Right, say again, this is the default gateway for the network you're assigning this to, not the DHCP's default gateway. DNS server is the same as it always is, 50. Well, for this network anyway, 50.0.0.254. Now the starting IP address is going to be your first usable IP address in the network that isn't already used. So for this I've set as a default gateway as 0.1, so I can't use 0.1, I'd use 0.2. So all I have to change is 2. You've got to make sure the starting IP is the same as the default gateway's IP. This is set to 80 because the DHCP server was originally set to 80, so it thinks that that's what needs to be put there, but it's not. You need to put the correct number. Again, subnet mask will be set to whatever you have it. This is set to 0, it can be set to 240, whatever it is, but I'm just setting it to 0 for now. And number of users, I'm just going to say 5. That can be whatever is restricted, whatever is required for the network. TFTP server, leave that blank for now, we haven't learned that yet. Then you go add. And hopefully I should be able to go to PC0, IP address, and click on DHCP, and it should work. Actually, it won't. I'll get this error. Because I've missed one step, which is forwarding the DHCP request through the router. So I'll do that for this network first. So all you have to do for this command is go into the interface. So interface F00, and all you have to do is type in IP helper address, and you type the address that you have assigned to the DHCP, not the default gateway for the DHCP. So the IP address that we assigned to the DHCP, which is 80.0.0.2, and that's what you have to put. Hit enter, then exit, and it should now work. If I do it again, the request is successful. Now if I were to test this by pinging the DNS server, ping 50.0.0.254, and it should work straight away, which it is. So we've configured a DHCP server for one network, which is network 1, but we need to do it for 4 others. So to do this, we simply just go back to the DHCP server, go back to the service and the DHCP tab, and create a new one for network 2, network 3, and network 4. So network 2. Default gateway, again, this is the default gateway for the network, not for the DHCP server, which is 40.0.0.1. The default gateway can be anything. I've just set it as the first usable IP so that I know there won't be any clashes. You can set it as the last one, but I prefer to set it as the first. DNS server again, 50.0.0.254. And fixing up the starting IP address to be the correct IP address, 40, and we want it to start at 2. And subnet mask is okay, change this to 5, because it doesn't need any more really, and add. And we will do this 2 more times for the other 2 networks that I haven't added. So changing the default gateway to the default gateway now for network 3, which is 50.0.0.1. DNS stays the same, changing the starting IP address to match the default gateway. Subnet mask will change depending on the size of the network. In this case, it doesn't have to. And go add. And you do this one more time for network 4, which is 70, and it's 70 there. 5 again, add. Now, the DHCP now has 4 different server pools. That's what these are called. Well, sorry, 4 different pools, not server pools. Each of these has 4 different ones for each network. The way that the networks and DHCP decide which ones receive which IP addresses is through the default gateway. When the request is sent, if that network does not have that default gateway, it does not receive that IP. If the request was sent for an IP address of 60.0.0.1 from network 2, it won't work because the default gateway for that network is 40.0.0.1. Now, the DHCP server may be configured, but it's not fully complete. We've only assigned the IP helper address to the first router, which is router 0. It needs to be assigned to all ports. I assign it to every single port on a router that it requires, just so that there aren't any errors or mistakes that would come up. So if we go into router 0, go into config T, and go into the interface serial 000 and type IP helper address and the address of the DHCP server, so which is 80.0.0.2. I spelled that incorrectly. Helper, there we go, and it works. Change to the next interface, which is 01, and give it the same command. So now the DHCP response is being sent to F00, S000, and S0001. Now we need to do this for the other 2 routers. This needs to be done for all routers on the network to send a request, or else it won't work. So if I were to try PC9 and try and get a default DHCP request, it won't work. This is because router 2 is not sending through the request, it's just blocking it, like how the first one was doing before we configured that. So if we configure the rest of the routers, now when doing it for the other routers, you do the same command, the exact same thing over and over again. You don't change the IP address, you don't change the command, it is the same command. So we'll stick with 80.0.0.2, interface S0, IP help address, and then change that to the 1, and IP help address. So now if we were to go to PC9 and try to get a DHCP request again, it works. And it works. 70.3, well 70.0.0.3. And everything is set there to what we need. And from this computer, we should be able to ping the DNS server. Just to test it. 50.0.0.254. And there you go, it's working. To make the routers talk to each other, I've used the protocol EIGRP. That's what's currently in use, not root version 2 or OSPF. Now, the final router, which has 4 ports used up, and 2 interface F0, and type the IP helper command again, which is the IP address of the DHCP server. Nothing's changed from the other 2 routers. Same command. So all interfaces now are allowing the DHCP request to go through, and all should now receive a DHCP IP address. If I go to PC3 on network 2, it works. If I go to PC6 on network 3, desktop IP address, DHCP, and it should work, and it does. And that's how you should and need to configure a DHCP server so that it can assign IP addresses to the correct networks.